like how many people interested in one or the other, and then now that pretty much everybody has on, can you raise hands if you are more interested in YS? 5. And if you're more interested in stable credit?
Like this first.
Okay, so there's more on the YS, like 60% YS and 40% credit. Yes.
And for the first one, YEth?
YS, okay.
Yes.
So let's just focus mainly on YS, but I personally interested in stable credit as well. So I think it would be great if we can spend a bit of time on that. And in terms of going through, I was thinking about I go through everything, but because there's Andre, may I just pass it to you and you just do the brain dump of what YS is and then going through the code and all the stuff, or?
I don't mind. The only reason I might not recommend that is because I'm going to be assuming a lot of pre-knowledge for everyone. So it might be better for someone that doesn't have that pre-knowledge to actually sort of do the walkthrough, and then I can jump in as required, because then otherwise I'm just worried I skip stuff that I take for granted.
Okay, so then I'll give try of trying to explain, and you can jump in wherever I'm not explaining enough or I'm saying it wrong way. So let's do that.
Perfect.
Yeah, and let me share the screen again. So probably everybody, I'll try to make it a bit bigger as well, but you guys should have the link on the, which was, I put a link from the event page. So if you, is this big enough?
It's good, Makoto.
Yeah, okay. So first read me, probably I should, maybe it's slightly easier. I just go through this one. So in general, I think YBall itself is let's just start from UI. Young Finance for the basic. Who hasn't used? Actually, let me try to see the full list. Who hasn't used Y at all? Okay, just one. So I think when I first got in, now it's got a lot simpler, but before it was quite confusing. That so there is something called dashboard. I never go into dashboard to be honest, but I think initially it was about Y-arm, where this one is kind of lending switching machine that if you go to put into die, it could switch between like compound and RB and all that stuff, I think.
Makoto, are you on XDAI right now? Is that why it's not showing live data?
Possibly. Okay. Yeah. So it shows like 10% interest or based on things. And this was first interested one, but now I think what interesting is volts, that basically curve is also mind-boggling thing, but it's kind of amalgamation of various stable tokens, and it gives a lot higher earning by, I think it kind of getting various tokens, like does it get curve token? So like if you put into this one the pool, and then this one is also equivalent thing is if you go to curve finance. So you see number 2, Y die, which has APY 3%, but please 30 690% CRV. So even though just getting the interest rate from the lending platform is like single digit, now many exchanges start giving the governance token. So if you earn it and it kind of immediately after you dump it, well not dump, you know, like sell it, you get higher price, right? And so that's what it shows. And it has different so-called strategy. And if you go to, is it Fields Yarn? It gives that, for example, curve YLP uses strategy curve border. So this is same thing as using, this one. And then now it goes to the architecture that like, so there's things called Vault, which has a controller which just select best strategy. But I think choosing best strategies is not done automatically. It's done by governance and whoever the admin just switch, if I understand correctly, to certain strategies. Sometimes it's much easier to farm certain governance token than the other. So based on the governance, I think is switch. So that's a base. So there's lots of things which is very confusing, but everything, if you look into this strategy, for example, this USD LP, it all goes to so-called, this is strategy, sorry. But if you kind of, let me try to think, I do have the board. Not this one. Deposit is, yeah. So this is actually the visualization tool Nick from Truffle team gave it to me, that based on the real transaction, it kind of visualizes the flow of the functions going through, and it always starts from a vault deposit, and it goes to controller, and it picks the right strategy, and it does whatever the stuff. So it's all, so that's what it. I missed. Yeah, this hierarchy. Okay. Then for the YEth, so most of the stuff is, I think, deposit and withdraw. That's what majority of user interact. When you get into the vault, you call deposit, and when you withdraw, you get the money back. And one thing I couldn't have a chance to do is there's things called harvest and force rebalance, which I didn't have time to dig in. Is this harvest and rebalance, is it specific to the strategy, each strategy, or sorry, same for each strategy, or is it specific to this YEth?
They're specific to the strategy. So harvest you'll only have in strategies that receive some kind of token that it needs to sell. If there isn't a token to sell, it doesn't have a harvest function. And rebalance you'll only find on delegated vaults. So only something that has debt that it has to repay. And the force rebalances allows governance to override the debt in case of emergency.
Andre, would you describe the YEth vault as a delegated vault as well?
Yeah, the YEth and the so they're technically two different kinds of delegated vaults.
Yeah.
So the YEth vault, its delegated strategy actually sits in the strategy itself, versus if you look at the link vault, its delegation actually sits in the vault itself. So it is two different kinds of approaches that we were testing. I'm more partial to the delegation being in the vault itself, because the vaults have a lot more interaction than the strategies, which means they're a lot more granular, which I prefer. But correct, the YEth, while the vault itself is not a delegated vault, the current strategy is a delegated strategy.
Right, makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, so the harvest, this exists in pretty much all strategies?
No. So I'm just opening Feel the Urn quick. Another nice one is stats.finance. So the D-Force. So if we look at strategy D-Force for USDC currently, that deposits USDC into Compound. So that's earning interest on the USDC. That does not require a harvest. The USDC strategy. Just go to Feel the Urn and I'll work from the top down.
Okay.
And then I can give a quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so the very top one, the USDC vault, the strategy D-Force USDC, that's USDC into Compound, which is receiving based borrowing interest. Then D-Force themselves harvest comp and sell that to USDC. So that's not part of this strategy. But then this strategy gets DF token from D-Force and sells that as well to USDC. So there's the three yield bearing components. So that one is a harvest strategy. But if we look at the TUSD one, for example, that one actually just converts TUSD into Curve LP tokens and then puts that into the Curve LP vault. So it does not have a harvest. And this is often a place where people get confused about the 5%, what I like to call a harvest fee, but other people call it performance fee, in that a strategy that doesn't have harvest doesn't have that fee. It's only when gas costs are incurred that fee is subsidized to cover the gas costs. So the TUSD one is an example of something that does not have that fee, since its yield generation is completely passive. There's nothing it has to do to generate the yield. So it's a non-harvest strategy. DAI is a non-harvest strategy. USDT is the same as USDC. YFI strategy is currently inactive, but that'll be reactivated as a delegated strategy. And then the Curve LP ones all use the same harvest system, from using the underlying token in the lender, and then the trading fees from Curve, and then liquidating the Curve token as well.
Andre, what you said just a second ago, explaining the USDC vault, is it right that you just said that the strategy, the D-Force, sort of serves two purposes there? The first is that they're actually the ones that sell the comp for USDC, and then they also have their own DETH token that's sold. I didn't understand that first part of it, that D-Force was selling the comp itself. Is there a reason you're using them for that rather than sort of having your own custom logic within that strategy that would, you know, sell it on Uniswap or 1inch or something?
So the one option is going for a clean compound strategy, in which case we would deposit USDC for CUSDC into Compound and then harvest comp ourselves. This strategy allows us to get the CUSDC, harvest the Compound, and harvest the DF token. So it's a lot higher yield than a base comp strategy.
And since you were harvesting the DF token, you might as well also use them to harvest the comp as well. Is that the
correct?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you would earn the DF token without letting them farm the comp.
Makes
Correct.
sense. And so I had another question about the later thing you were describing about the harvesting. How do you design the sort of mechanism for how frequently to harvest? How aware of gas prices is it? Is that something that I've seen some discussion in some of the forums about ways to improve that and optimize that? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of how that harvest mechanism is designed to be used or is working, and if there's sort of, you know, better models that you think can be applied soon.
So I mean, it's quite granular at this point, which is where I like it. But obviously, from a system profit perspective, it can still change. So the current metrics it takes into consideration, number one is how much slippage will it incur from the asset it's farming. So, for example, if we look at the curve, the Y pool Curve LP, which is $235 million worth currently in there, it farms quite a lot of Curve, which means if it waits too long, the slippage on selling that into Uniswap becomes too great. So the first thing it checks is when does that slippage fall outside of its thresholds, versus something like the USDC vault, which is 17 million in it, which farms the DF token. It can go a much longer time before its farming slippage is affected. So that's the first rule. The second rule is as soon as the 5% harvest fee that it takes from selling the object would cover the gas, it also triggers. So that second rule is where I think the community wants to tweak it a little bit so that it doesn't happen as often. I prefer it happening that often because I find with price shifts, it flattens the yield curve a lot better versus if the longer you wait in between, the longer price swings there are. So at an aggregate sort of ROI in past comparison, it performs a lot better the more granular you do it. So those are my considerations, but we'll see what the community comes up with. That's kind of the fun about this whole thing is at this point I'm turning into a spectator.
So right now there's a bot that's looking for whether those conditions are satisfied, the slippage threshold, and then the whether the gas will be covered by the 5% harvest fee. And that's
correct. There are a few bots. I run them. Artem runs them. A few of the community members runs them as well. So there's a few out there in the wild just as fallbacks. And each person runs their own implementation just to make sure that there's not a code fault as well. But correct, there's bots that sit and monitor those two variables and then decide to trigger.
Are there people that are empowered to manually trigger harvest outside of what the bot thresholds?
Yes. So there's three primary roles. There is a harvester role, which can be assigned to a contract, which can also be a externally owned account. There is the strategist role, who is the strategy developer themselves, and then governance can always do an override as well.
But for currently existing protocols, the harvester is a contract, and so individuals, either just random users or people that have privileged status within these contracts, do not have the ability to also go in and trigger more harvests than the contract that's assigned the harvester role right now. Is that
correct?
Right?
So the reason for that is it's fairly easy to do a flash loan into a pool. Dump the token into there with incurring 99% slippage and then returning. So you could effectively make the ROI negligible when you can front run the harvest like that, which is fairly easy to actually do. So the main thing is the harvester contracts, when they're finally deployed and ready, they have two conditions. One is they can only be triggered by an externally owned account, so it can't be a contract that triggers them to stop the flash loan front running exploit. And then number two, the harvesters, the 5% fee that currently goes to treasury, the gas cost is subsidized to the harvester so that the external account that triggers the harvest actually gets the gas cost covered plus a little bit extra. And then it's just based on first come, first serve who actually triggers the harvest.
Now you can fire off as many questions you like, guys.
I actually have a question just on that point. And Andre, and maybe this isn't a fully thought through thought, but could you have a transaction where you counterfactually deployed a contract at a known address that initiates the flash loan, destroys itself before the check on whether or not whether or not there's code at that address, and then redeploys it after the attack in the same transaction?
Yeah, so that's if you do a address code check to see if it's has contract bytecode deployed in its memory store. You can bypass that by making it execute in the constructor, but the secondary countermeasure to that is making sure that tx.origin equals message.sender. Because in that instance, the tx.origin is the initiator of the deployer of the contract and then the contract trigger. So those are the two checks you build in to make sure it's not a malicious contract that's front running the harvest.
Cool, thank you.
Pleasure.
I have a few questions from the customer perspective, less than from a developer. So I have 99.6 YEth, but I don't really have them because I wrapped them into cream. How can I check how many ETH are they worth now? So if I have 99 YEth, let's say, how can I check how many ETH are they worth at the moment?
So you'll have to look at the contracts currently. But if we go to the contracts, I'm just going to click on the YEth contract quick. And if you go just in Etherscan, read, then there's going to be a get price per full share.
Do you
That
want
get
to
price
share
per
the
full
screen?
share. I'm on my phone and on my laptop at the same time, so I can't actually share from
So
this
do
side.
I just do that on your behalf?
Sure, you can just click on the YEth vault.
Why is for from the
Yeah, that one. The one you clicked, just go to Etherscan.
this strategy or
The vault itself, yeah, there.
okay.
Right there.
Yeah.
And then contract, read contract. And then about in the middle, if you scroll down, there's going to be get price per full share right there. And that's a 18 decimal denominated conversion rate. So each one ETH you put in is currently worth 1.006837203, etc., ETH. So if you were to redeem your one YEth now, you would get 1.0068 ETH back per each one share.
But that's my second question. There's a 0.5% withdrawal fee. So if I withdraw, I will get 0.5% less.
So that depends where you're withdrawing from. If you're withdrawing from the vault buffer, you do not pay a fee. If you're withdrawing from the underlying strategy, you do pay a fee. So as long as you're within the buffer realm, which if we look currently, there's 10,000 ETH in there. So you're not going to pay a fee when you withdraw right now.
Okay. So the moment I withdraw, I just need to check how much buffer do we have. If I'm over the buffer, then I pay a fee. If I'm under the buffer, which is the most probable, I'm not paying any fee. Cool.
Correct. And that's specifically designed so that users that frequently need to move smaller amounts can do it without needing to impact the underlying strategy. It's only when underlying strategies are impacted that the fees are imposed. And that's specifically designed so that bigger users and whales, etc., are subsidized to actually pay that for the smaller users.
Are there any site which checks like now it's free to withdraw that kind of stuff?
Sorry, my man?
I just wonder if there's a site which flags like, you know, if right now, if you less than this amount, you don't have to pay, or we have to check Etherscan all the time?
I don't think anyone has built it yet. Sounds cool though.
Yeah, maybe Chris, whatever you're building, please add it.
Andre, on that same sort of notion, could you talk a little bit about this idea of like disabled strategies? I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, if this is even right, but I got the sense that, you know, when certain conditions are present, there's more people that are put into the buffer just in general, and withdrawals are free. Or maybe I'm getting confused with the governance part of it.
No, that's correct. So the Wi-Fi strategy, as an example, it was Cream had stopped their subsidizing of depositing. So its APR went from around 30% annualized to below, I think it was about 3%. And 3% is too small given the withdrawal fee. So instead, the strategy triggered a withdrawal all, which removes all of the funds from the underlying strategy into the vault. And because all the funds are in the vault, it means it's free to withdraw for the users then. So there are, dependent on the vault, there are a few conditions that can trigger full removal from the strategy into the vault. This, for example, is things like when the downstream source is close to having insufficient liquidity, then the strategy removes itself as a safety measure because it doesn't want to be in a position where it can't unwind itself. That's an example when it comes out to the vault. When APR drops too low, that's an example when it comes out to the vault. So it does depend a lot on the strategy as well, but those are just two examples of when, in quotes, you can say it's disabled because it moves out of the strategy into the vault itself so that anyone can withdraw.
So looking at Field of the Urn here, if you look at the Wi-Fi vault, where it says Urn Finance Strategy Cream Wi-Fi, strategy holdings is 0, and then the vault holdings is 667.26 Wi-Fi. So that would mean everybody that's in that vault, you know, would be able to withdraw without the penalty. And then for the other strategies, is it right to say that it's only if you're in the delta between the strategy holdings and the vault holdings that you'd be able to withdraw without a fee? You'd be in that buffer zone.
Correct.
So like TUSD users have, you know, a 3 in 4 chance of being able to withdraw for free, whereas 100% of Wi-Fi vault users will be able to withdraw for free, and then USDT, you're almost certainly not able to withdraw for free.
So I missed last 2 minutes conversation, but I'm wondering, like, one of the question I wanted to ask was, so YEth, currently there's, I think, 18 millions YEth O's maker, but Carve has 16 million, so 2 million minus. And I thought that was a reason which kind of is disabled from the front end UI, that now you can't put it, I think. Yeah, but when I actually went through Etherscan, I was actually do interact. Does that mean it's not actually disabled, or this vault mechanism actually prevent people to get in?
So you can deposit into the vault itself, but the vault will no longer deposit into the strategy. So you're not going to gain any APR by depositing, but you can put your ETH into the vault should you want. It's just not going to have any benefit for you. And correct, the threshold was around 25 million minimum. So because it dropped below that threshold, it started to unwind itself on the DAI side, and that's why we wanted to stop deposits until it was within safety thresholds again.
So if I got in before that threshold reached, I would have earned things, but if I join afterward, it just doesn't do anything.
Correct.
Because I just put like 0.01 ETH last night. I thought I was earning something, but it's not doing anything.
Well, look, you can still gain benefit from that, because now you have YEth, and you can now go put YEth inside of Cream, and then you can farm there. So even though the YEth isn't earning, you can actually still use that output to farm Cream in the Cream system. So there's still a little bit of composability value there, but yeah, you're unfortunately not gaining any benefit from the underlying ETH strategy.
And when that threshold is improved, does my position automatically start earning something, or do I have to?
Correct.
Easy.
Okay. No, there's nothing you have to do. As long as your funds are in the vault, when the strategy is rotated, you'll just start earning on it.
And is it almost like a fast in, fast come that, like, now, like, if there's 150 people and only 100 people earning it, then when the 100th people, whatever inside the people leaves, and there's enough cover, whoever enters earliest in, like, fast in the line start getting, or like everybody who's in the wait list start getting a bit, or
when the strategy swaps, everyone will start earning, but that's only after the strategy swaps from the current one.
I see.
Andre, can I clarify something on there? Because my understanding was, even though deposits are disabled in the UI, and the kind of collateralization ratio is being carefully managed in the Maker Vault. Even if I stuck in 1 ETH now, I would get obviously the kind of pool token, this depository receipt. Wouldn't that give me claim to a kind of proportionate amount of the ETH, both in the kind of buffer in the vault as well as the strategy, and therefore, even though my 1 ETH might not be deposited into the strategy, and it sits in the buffer because of this careful liquidation ratio management, a proportion of the ETH is still earning, and creating, you kind of got the flywheel of more ETH, and therefore, wouldn't my 1 ETH have a claim?
Technically, by the way the pool calculates based on the get price per full share, but right now the amount that's earning in the strategy is so small that you're talking about like a 0.0 something percent. Your statement is correct. It's just if you deposit now, you're not going to see any realized gains on that. But in terms of how the share logic works, yes, the underlying amount is incremented, and you are still, by virtue of having it in the vault, you have that share percentage of the underlying growth. For YE Vault specifically right now, it's just so small that you won't see a benefit.
Makes sense.
So why did you disable deposits only in the UI, not in the contract?
So we don't add functionality like that into the contracts because it costs too much gas. Anything that you do that requires an extra check, whether it be so it's the same reason we don't do deposit caps and we don't do per account caps, because every time you add any little bit of logic like that, you're adding more and more gas. And one of the benefits of the vaults is how gas efficient they are. So if we wanted to force deposits like that, we would have to add all of those extra checks and balances into the system. So instead, what they have is they have a breaker between what's in the vault and what's allowed to go into the strategy. So right now, nothing that's in the vault can go into the strategy because it's blocked by the breaker.
Thank you very much. And one more question, maybe if I would like to, let's say, to the Vault UI, adding information about the withdrawal fee based on the amount of Vault holdings versus strategy holdings. I know there's a GitHub repo. I can just develop it there and make a PR. Where do I talk to developers if I would like to join?
The forum's the best place to start, gov.urn.finance, and then from there you'll join one of the relevant groups, and they either work on Discord or Telegram, depending on which area you're in. I think most of the web devs are on Discord. Most of the smart contract devs are on Telegram.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now it's 15 minutes left. Should we switch to the next one, or do you guys have a couple like a die-hard question, like some question I'm desperate to ask?
I have one more, but I don't want to take too much time.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, the inevitable problem of too much capital under management, you know, is rearing its head, both in terms of risk management, where, you know, we're seeing with the YEth strategy, and also, you know, just more capital makes it more difficult to earn high yields and exploit market opportunities. So I'm keen to hear what Andre has to say about that, and you know, whether this kind of multi-strategy, you know, rollover type thing that Banteg posted about on Twitter is the expected approach.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, the more capital that's added, the more risk and the lesser amount of yield that is capable of being generated. Most of these things have a fixed amount of tokens they give out on a day. So up until X amount of capital, it's highly efficient. Adding more capital actually just dilutes earnings. It doesn't actually increase earnings. So we're currently busy with two approaches to this. One is building a few different systems that can actually scale better in terms of APY received over capital provided. But even then, you're always going to end up with sort of a log n type curve that's going to balance out over time. And then on the risk / APY management, that's the new waterfall strategies that are going to be implemented, where there's a primary bucket, but that bucket has a limit, and when it's reached, it overflows to subsequent buckets and withdrawals, also waterfall like that. But that's probably a little bit further away into the future, because there's a lot more auditing and development work that needs to be done there. But those are the current two approaches to disarming that problem.
Cool. Thanks, Andre.
It's a pleasure.
Cool. So we have like 12 minutes, but let's try to quickly go to the next topic of the StableCredit. That I guess it's still not fully complete, so the rest might slightly change. But yeah, so in a nutshell, my understanding is that instead of I read the blog post 3 times and I'm still not 100% sure, but the bits I understood is like you can create any pair as long as Chainlink can provide a feed. So in the example you said, like so basically in the Uniswap, you have a token to ETH and ETH to token, but like you could just do token to token. That's one bit. And then you have something called single-sided market, which you kind of combined. And to the point that like you can, rather than put in the pair, which you kind of let into the impermanent loss and all the stuff, you just put the currency and it uses whatever the kind of base currency. In this case, currently it's USD, but you could do base currency as a JPY or Euro, and you can lend it. So that I asked to Twitter what it's actually replacing, and some people said like you could use. It could actually basically replace Maker's vault system. So then I thought that like because of all the YEth kind of DAI becoming the bottleneck of the scalability. So I thought like if you have this in place, instead of keep using DAI to mint StableCredit, you could actually use this so that you could potentially increase more lending line, or I don't know, I might be completely wrong.
No, you've got it right. That's one of the core baselines of the system. So there's let me take a step back first. So the first thing that and this was YSwap.exchange, which we developed a while back. Now its goal was simple. I needed more APR opportunities. So I needed more places where I could put a currency and be able to gain some kind of interest on that. And one of the best places is trading. Trading will, for a very long time, be a very profitable area to provide liquidity, because you're essentially a automated market maker, as we know, AMM, and there are very good fees to make there. The problem with all of those strategies, where there are always 2+ pairs, and 2+ pairs have impermanent loss, and as soon as you add impermanent loss, you need to start making decisions that are not that straightforward to codify, because you need to start deciding to which pair am I going to trade, is that worth it, where do I trade that out after I get the pair, etc. So started working on YSwap.exchange, which was a single-sided liquidity provider for Uniswap in essence. So the concept was simple. In Uniswap v1, you have DAI to ETH and you have ETH to USDC. And when you do a USDC to USDT trade, you are actually doing USDT to ETH, ETH to USDC, and you're fulfilling that trade. So ETH in Uniswap 1 facilitated this base currency, this transfer layer. But you could replace that with anything. So instead of having ETH, the original idea was, okay, but let's use something that's correlated loosely to these assets, so that it can become what we called back then a transfer token. So in the USDT to USDC example, if you were to go to Uniswap, you would provide $10 of USDT and $10 of ETH, and on the other side $10 and $10. In this case, when you provided the liquidity, you provided $10 of USDT, and the system created $10 of, in quotes, ETH. So for practical reasons, think of it like synthetic ETH. It just created synthetic ETH, and it puts it in the AMM. So you don't get it at that point in time. So your value add is that you've now got single-sided exposure, and arbitrage takes care of the rest. So if someone else now adds in more USDT into that pool, it means that the ETH has become cheaper. So now if you have a connecting pair, which again is synthetic ETH and USDC, then arbitrage traders are incentivized to add in USDC and take out USDT. So normal trading rules apply, and they actually maintain the equilibrium of the price. And this means that the price stays in equilibrium with the oracle. So right now it's a little bit messy because it's Chainlink oracles on the one side and Uniswap price on the other side. The final version will most likely use Uniswap's V2's oracles so that they stay much closer in sync. But for the POC, it was a lot faster to use the Chainlink system. But now while that system sort of worked, the one problem it had is it lacked strong user incentives, because now it needs to compete with standard liquidity pools. So we didn't see a lot of traction on that. And then Hasu was actually on Twitter, he mentioned this concept of a decentralized lending platform. So now the problem with that is, how do you know which pairs you can add that won't just empty out your system? So like right now, let's say Aave was completely, anyone could add any pair. So I could create, shitcoin 123, I add it as a accepted collateral, I mint $1 billion worth of it, and I take out all of the other collateral in Aave because there's nothing anyone can do. So right now, lending platforms need to be slightly restricted in that sense. So started playing with the concept of how we can use AMMs to facilitate utilization ratios. Because now if you look at something like Uniswap again, and let's say you have the USDT synthetic ETH example, the more USDT you take out of that system, the more expensive that USDT becomes versus the synthetic ETH. So while as a normal trading pair that adds a trade premium, it also actually works as a utilization ratio in that it gives a premium or a discount depending on how much of that asset is available in the system. So it actually ended up being a very nice decentralized mechanism for utilization ratios. So then the next thing we added on top of that is now you need the concept of debt. Because at this point, you've provided some form of collateral, but now you need a debt that comes out of that system, or a credit, as we actually refer to it, because I prefer the terminology of credit over debt, because debt is just negative and credit is awesome, even though it's exactly the same thing. So now but now we don't want to give the person the full credit line. So in other words, if I provide $10 of USDT, I don't want to provide that person $10 worth of credit, because then they can just infinite loop leverage and that'll break the system very quickly. So the next thing the system needed to do is to calculate the weight of a given market in its equilibrium. So in this case, it would see there's 10 USDT, and there's 10 USDC, so total market equilibrium of debt minted is 20. I'm providing 10 USDT, so it's 10 over 10 of a market of 20. So my actual utilization ratio at that point is going to be somewhere between 33 and 50%. So that's the actual dollar value I get out. So for that 10 USDT I provide, I'm now receiving a debt of $5. Now this $5 I can go use to buy more USDC and exit that system. So that's a standard borrow collateral lending market, but it actually uses the same debt concept as Maker to facilitate that. I'm making this a lot more complex than it needs to be. It's a lender mixed with an automated market maker that does dynamic utilization ratios, that calculates dynamic debt based on the collateral you provide, and that still sounds too complex.
Well,
It's
I was amazed that I took a quick dive into the code, and actually there's not much logic.
Not at all. It is so simple.
Yeah, so I'll just go quickly. That I went to look into the deposit and the withdrawal. So all it does is first it's check USD price, then create it, if you put token A, then you create the token, check the price of token A, like Kyber or whatever. Then you create a pair and a Uniswap, and you mint the StableCredit token, which is the value of the USD price. Then you mint the LPT token and give the token to the user. Then assign the credit to the user. And I think the assign credit to the user, this is a part I think it does the heavy lifting work of the, I was reading where.
It does the utilization ratios.
Yeah, that based on the utilization. And when you withdraw, it actually doesn't really do anything, that you just get credit and you burn the credit and you remove from Uniswap.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do to facilitate everything I just said. Like it's the least amount of code I've written that has the biggest amount of net impact in what it actually is. But like if you maybe so that's sort of the core. I shared with you on Twitter the helper. Now the helper shows you more about how the whole ecosystem gets put together. So deposit and withdraw in the core is specifically just to give you credit and for you to be able to burn that credit to receive your collateral again. Now, in the helper, you do things like using that credit to borrow an asset, or using the asset to repay to get credit back. and that's the lending side of it. But all of that actually just uses Uniswap. There's no special code, because the constant product market maker actually facilitates the premium and the discount required to simulate utilization ratios. And the nice thing about using an AMM underlying as well means that there's constant attention in terms of how much collateral can leave the system. So if people borrow link in mass, the more link they borrow, the more arbitragers are incentivized to add link to gain a benefit from one of the other pools out of the system. So it's the way that traders interact with collateral providers, that interact with borrowers, and the tension and equilibrium that these three create that actually make a in equilibrium system, which I think is really, really cool.
And does it matter which, like Uniswap or SushiSwap or like sashimi or sake, or is it just a constant logic you need? You don't really care what, because this one is just creating your pair with your protocol and whatever the token you are interested, right? So it doesn't matter anything else.
No, it doesn't. And you could use balancer pools as well if you wanted a different kind of variance. So maybe you didn't want 50%, 50%, and you wanted to keep some kind of threshold. You can do a 90-10. Any AMM that creates that trade tension is what you're looking for. So you could add this on top of YSwap. You can do it on Uniswap. A main reason I specifically built it on Uniswap is because Uniswap already has so many aggregators connected to it, which means, you know, there's people trading on 1inch, on Matcha, on Paraswap, and all of these traders, they're the ones helping to keep these pools in equilibrium. Because whether they know it or not, when they use a 1inch or a Paraswap, they're actually doing multipathing. So if the most trade efficient route is link into USD into USDC, then that's what the trader does, even though they're not aware of it. So by using the Uniswap base, it means I have access to all of the aggregators, which means I have access to all of the trade liquidity, and that's one of the things that keeps the system in sync.
And doesn't this have some sort of the kind of scalability issue? Like, for example, YEth stuff, like there's a demand of, there's not enough supply of DAI, hence like YEth can't scale as much as it like the 60 million stuff.
It scales a little bit better thanks to the fact that you have a synthetic asset on the other side, but it only scales insofar. So if we look at the DAI strategy right now, the DAI strategy doesn't scale great because it only has access to the Y pool, which means it's limited in terms of its total exposure to collateral. If instead it put that DAI into the stable protocol, then it's only constrained by the total amount of liquidity of the entire system. So it's not just one pool, you know, it's all of the link, all of the DAI, all of the USDC, all of the USDT, because your slippage in quotes when you provide collateral is a function of that pool's total contribution to the entire ecosystem. So the bigger this ecosystem, the more it can absorb. So if we add a WBTC vault that does this as well, and the delegated link vault puts USDC in as well, and the TUSD one puts in TUSD, then all of a sudden all of the different vaults and strategies are actually working together to scale this thing much bigger than it currently can. Because right now the strategies are very isolated. It's little pools on their own, versus if all of them use the stable protocol, then they start scaling as much as there is liquidity available in the vaults. And since that's a cyclic loop, so you know, the bigger the vault scale, the bigger the liquidity becomes, and the bigger the liquidity becomes, the bigger the vaults can become. It's a very positive feedback loop that it gets created between these two systems.
Sorry for keep asking question. Like, do you few questions. So when you say aggregate, is like a whole as the protocol, the stable credit protocol, and the YFI ecosystem. It's not like other pools in Uniswap. So they don't. That's irrelevant.
No. So other Uniswap pools won't add benefit, but anything that is minted via the stable credit protocol adds towards the total size of the pool. So if I were to right now switch on stable protocol for the whole Yearn system, that's $1 billion worth that can scale. Now, if you compare, 100 million of DAI over $1 billion, there's the slippage is insignificant. So it's a lot easier to scale all of the strategies by doing that, because we already have the liquidity to scale. So it's sort of a chicken egg answering itself equilibrium at this point.
And then what happens if it hits to the max? Like in case of the YS fold, if you enter above the threshold, it just doesn't do anything. Is it going to be the same?
Yes, it would be the same. It can just go a lot bigger right now. So I mean, if in the DAI strategy it's currently using, it's basically stopped at 25% of available liquidity. So that means its current threshold at 15 is around 50 to 60 to be safe. If it were to use this, then it can go up to 250 mil without much of a problem.
So I would imagine that when this actually productionized, people rush into it just to avoid like missing the same chance as Y is.
So there's no opportunity cost with the stable protocol, and there's no scalability issue with stable protocol. So there's no reason to rush into it, and there's no benefit to rush into it. Unlike the vaults, which have a max APY cap currently, and when that cap is reached, it just dilutes adding more. So vaults have that current scalability flaw. The stable protocol does not have that flaw. So I wouldn't recommend people rush into it at all. Like to let it grow slow and organic, and let people attack it and do what they do, and then let it grow from there. There's zero benefit to trying to front run this protocol.
Final question from me. I think when I mentioned in some Telegram channel, like, what obsolete, like a compound Aave or Maker, and I think starting from Aave said actually uses a Aave somewhere, but it doesn't use, does it?
So YSwap, the original creation, that's one of the components of this, put all of its collateral in Aave. This current implementation does not use Aave because it's trying to be as gas cheap as possible. So I'm moving slightly away from my POCs implementing lending, just so that their logic works a lot cheaper. But this could technically be built on top of Aave or another lender to add that extra APY on top of the existing ones.
I see. Interesting. I'm conscious of time. We are running out. Are there any couple of dying questions?
I had one. Sorry, I think this is short. Andre, looking at this, if you had Chainlink reporting prices for the tokens, and if you were to move those tokens to XDAI through the XDAI token bridges, do you see a problem with being able to build this system in sort of tandem on XDAI? I understand it wouldn't have the same opportunities to invest in the strategies that don't exist on XDAI, but as far as potentially creating kind of a kernel of a lending sort of protocol on XDAI that then potentially products and strategies would come from, do you think that this contract would be amenable to that, or do you see problems with using it on XDAI?
So it is a standalone, which means you can deploy it on XDAI on its own, and it will operate. I do believe it will have decreased efficiency though, because a large part of the system efficiency is based on the traders. So these are the traders that are using aggregators to actually balance these pools. So without them, you're going to have bigger arbitrage opportunities over time, which nothing prevents you from building a bot to even that out and do it. So it doesn't cripple the system, but you need to provide a little bit more infrastructure. Right now, I'm using Uniswap and these aggregators so that I don't have to build that infrastructure, because other people have already built it on ETH for me. But I'd say that's really the only caveat. Other than that, as long as the asset can bridge, and that's any ERC20 asset, then this protocol is standalone and doesn't require other protocols. So yes, it is actually in the Yearn ecosystem probably one of the few ones that can migrate without a problem.
So it could get copied to different chains left and right.
Well, it's only dependent on ERC tokens. So as long as you bridge the ERC token over, you can put it in the protocol, and the protocol allows you to mint it, and that allows you to trade, and that allows you to do everything else. So any standalone protocol that's only dependent on assets can move over pretty easily. So a base protocol like a Compound, a Aave, or a this, or even a Uniswap can move without actually affecting it. Something like Yearn, which is integrated into everything, it can't move because it needs a Uniswap, a Aave, a Compound, etc., before it can even attempt to try and migrate over.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's exciting to think about potentially like subtracting gas costs from it for people that are willing to come over there. That could have a pretty strong sort of bootstrapping motive for at least the folks that are going to be trading a lot, because if you can essentially get the benefit of these types of trades and arbitrage without the gas costs, especially in an uncertain volatile gas environment, there could be
definitely. And I mean, look, like I won't recommend it yet because I still have a few more things I want to add, but I mean, this is a fully decentralized lending protocol, which means it's one of the few things like Uniswap that you can just move over and it can just work, because there's a lot of on-chain protocols, but not necessarily fully decentralized protocols. Like if the companies that manage them stop managing them, the protocol's not going to work. But yeah, this is a good candidate.
Excellent. It's very exciting. Keep watching your GitHub.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andre, and thank you everybody for contributing questions. This was the most exciting session of the Codeup ever, and I'm gonna publish into YouTube. And as I mentioned, if you put in the contribution, it won't be a lot, like probably 50 XDAI or something. I'm gonna send to Andre so that he can join through XDAI next time. So thank you very much.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.